ago we lived in peace with native cedar trees that grew on cliffs and draws where fires could not reach. Then European settlers stopped the fires prairies need, which started an invasion of
So as mentioned, I'm
cedar
Jackson
trees.
Lindamood. I graduated with my master's in agricultural economics from K-State this spring, and this was one of the chapters that was part of my thesis. So I'm going to be talking about the woody cover impact on grassland values pretty much all across Kansas. So usually I have to spend a lot more time, introducing woody encroachment and what it is, but I guess I got a pretty good setup. So I can go pretty fast through these slides, spend some more time on some of the results. So basically, I think the biggest takeaway here is woody encroachment is not limited to non-native species such as eastern red cedar that was planted for shelter belts and hedgerows, but also, it's not just those, it's also the native species that have continued to grow due to new climates and, not having those hot or as raging for wildfires as we had in the past. So, on that top right picture, is more of kind of a woody encroachment on the grassland where you're seeing it kind of go into an area that traditionally would never have trees. And then you kind of have in the bottom right where you usually will have a creek that has, a riparian buffer around it where you have traditional trees. Those are starting to expand outwards due to, not as hot of fires going directly to it or grazing patterns that are allowing it to start encroach outwards. And as Luke mentioned, since 1990, nearly 1 million grassland acres have been converted to woodland in Kansas alone. So a big, funding opportunity from this project and kind of what started all of this is the Great Plains Grassland Initiative, which was launched by NRCS in 2021. Pretty much its goal is to reduce woody encroachment in select grassland regions across the state. And their way of doing that is they are making it to where landowners are eligible for financial incentives and technical support to monitor and mitigate woody encroachment on their operation. Okay, so this map, I made it with RAP, Rangeland Analysis Platform, pretty similar to what we already saw. So the outlined counties that I have on these maps are the study area for my sample, and these are all core funding regions for the Kansas Great Plains Grassland Initiative. So basically, if you're within these counties, within specific parts of the counties, you are eligible for financial compensation and help with managing your woody encroachment. So as you see, we're seeing a pretty strong directional shift pretty much across the state, specifically in the central and eastern portions, with some areas getting a lot more increases, such as, we have Medicine Lodge and pretty much south central Kansas and the Red Hills where we've seen a huge growth in woody encroachment. And then along the Arkansas River near Garden City in the western portion of the state where a lot more tree cover where it's traditionally not there. And then, of course, in the Flint Hills, we're seeing it pretty much everywhere. And it's kind of coming from that southeastern corridor that was had more traditional trees. It's starting to shift westward. So this kind of paper is kind of on the premises of this idea that we all know the negatives of woody cover, but some people, specifically outside of farming and ranching, believe there are positives of woody cover. So I'm not saying I believe in the positives. I'm just saying people believe them, specifically people who, like to hunt, like to gain other benefits from land. So pretty much we'll go over the negatives. So it reduces forage available to livestock. So pretty much kind of that exact diagram that Luke showed is pretty much where I got this. So in 2019, we lost 1.5 million tons of forage, which is 2.5 million hay bales, or 322,000 cows. So a lot of money is being lost because of this woody encroachment problem. As we mentioned, it reduces your rates of groundwater recharge. That's primarily a bigger concern in the western portion of the state, which is over the High Plains Aquifer, where they're having water recharge problems already, and that's just furthering it. It increases competition for soil moisture. So during your dry years, your grassland will not get as much water because there's more competition in the soil. And again, it increases the propensity for large and severe wildfires because it's way harder to fight when it starts to go into those heavily wooded areas. However, there are some potential positives from having woody cover on your traditional grassland. So, the biggest thing is your non-market benefits such as aesthetics. So say you want to buy a quarter section, you live in Wichita, you want to buy a quarter section to get away from the people and live the great life of living on the Flint Hills. You buy a quarter section, you want trees on your property, it makes it nice and pretty, it's not barren. And then also, if you're a hunter, that may provide a good habitat for big game species such as white-tailed deer. This also creates opportunities for hunting lease income, which has been way more prevalent and popular this past couple decades. And again, it's always been used for shelter belts. So my paper aims to kind of answer three central questions. So first, we're looking at producer perceptions on woody encroachment and what they believe the impact on pasture land values are. Then we use real property-based transactions to examine how woody encroachment, particularly woody cover, impacts Kansas grassland values. And then we also look how that impact is spread across our study area from western Kansas all the way to the Flint Hills. So we have multiple data sources. Our first data source is a survey. We have both workshop survey data that was from 7 workshops from February 2023 to June 2024, with around 160 people responding there. And then we also had a mail-in survey that got around 650 people, and that was around 20% of the survey sent out. So if anyone answered the survey and sent it back, I appreciate it. It was very helpful. So, and then also we used real data. We used transaction level data that was obtained from the Property Valuation Division inside the Department of Revenue from 1990 to 2024. So basically, we have every single agricultural transaction, and then we limit it down based on these factors. So they must be within the counties that we issued earlier. They're greater than 40 acres in size, but less than 5,000 acres in size. They have to have at least 30% grassland acreage with 0% irrigated acreage. We exclude any property that has more than $100,000 in total appraised values. Basically, if there's a house there, that inflates your property value quite a bit, and we wouldn't be able to truly account for that. And then we also must be an arm's length transaction. So we're making it to where if grandpa sold to his son, that isn't included in our data set because that price may not be a true fair market value. And then we match woody cover using the WRAP data set at a 30-meter resolution. So basically, each square is 30 meters by 30 meters wide. It gives us a value 0 to 100 across the entire state. And then we match that value for every single transaction through their parcel boundaries. Okay. So now I'm going to go into survey results. The numbers are going to be pretty small for you guys, so I'll talk big picture. So on your left is what the workshop answered. So we have top left workshop, bottom left mail-in results, and then on the right is your mail-in results separated by your ecoregion. So when we look at the top right, pretty much a strong majority, so 61% of people said it was a major problem. Pretty much everyone here probably would agree that as well. We have 35% of people saying it was a minor problem. But then when we look in the mail-in results, it was not as many people thought it was a major problem. That was primarily due to people in the playa landscape, on the western side where woody encroachment is a lot more contained in specific regions. And then also, the Red Hill is south central, but then we see, the Flint Hills, a lot of people still truly believe that woody encroachment is at least a minor problem. Okay. Another thing that we want to look at is what is your purpose for owning land in Kansas? Because as we mentioned, the potential positives of woody encroachment truly come from non-agricultural purpose for your land. So maybe if you, derive benefit from hunting, fishing, living on the land, maybe you wouldn't have that much of a negative for having trees on your land. So, but basically, 65% of all of our mail-in respondents said agricultural production is my only reason I own land in Kansas, and I gain no other benefit. And then we have 33% of people who said production is my first benefit. However, I gain secondary benefit from not recreational access to just hunting, fishing, living on the land, be away from city. And we had very few people answer, recreation only, recreation first, and then ambience only. That was probably mainly due to us making it to where you have to have at least, for this survey, you had to have at least 80 acres in your name. And a lot of the people who, do recreational only or, ambiance only, where that's pretty much you'd buy a quarter section and have a house on it. So they wouldn't really be surveyed. So now we're going to go into the impact woody encroachment has on agricultural land values. So on the left is our workshop results from the survey. So they were asked 3 separate questions. The first one was, what would 20% tree cover do to the market value of pasture and grasslands. Second question is, what would 40% tree cover do? And what would 60% tree cover do? So as we see, pretty much all the people in these workshops who were landowners, appraisers, stakeholders, anyone who cared to show up, a lot of people, majority had a decrease in land value. That's what they believed as a professional in the field or a landowner. With, at 20%, 35%, give or take, said there would be no impact. Trees are trees. It's not that much. We can live with it. And then 20% of people said it would be an increase in your land value, probably due to some of those recreational accesses that we mentioned earlier. However, when we go into 40%, that no impact response drops drastically. It's now split between around 52% decrease and around 40% increase. So it's a really strong divide of, we kind of just don't, there's really a lot of uncertainty. Some people believe it increases your land value. Maybe if you derive benefits of hunting, maybe you do see some benefit from it. You can accept a little bit of forage loss if you can shoot a trophy white-tailed deer every single year and brag about your friends at the coffee shop, or maybe get hunting lease value of where you can get another primary, more secondary income from maybe your already strained ranching income. And then when we go to 60%, it stays roughly the same. Your no impact drops a little bit more, and then more people say a decrease in land value than an increase. So pretty much, but again, at that 60% tree cover, you're really struggling to get any sort of forage production value out of that parcel. So that's probably that reason. However, when we go into the mail-in survey, we ask primarily, have you observed or experienced any impacts due to woody encroachment? So that workshop, they were asked, what's your opinion? What would you believe would happen based on your experience? In the mail-in survey, we asked if you've experienced it, observed it in your neighbors, to rental rates or pasture values in market due to woody encroachment. And 70% of people said there really was no impact. And then 21% said a decrease, and then around 10% said an increase. So that's primarily due, I believe, to it's really hard. Grassland is kind of the third tier. When you look at agricultural land, you have irrigated land at the top, then cropland, then grassland. Can you really decrease grassland values much further because they're such a valuable commodity, especially in today's world? So then the last question that we're looking at from the survey, it's going to be really small for the people in back, so I will, go over it again. So we're looking at top 3 factors that contribute most to the difficulty of controlling tree/brush encroachment in your operation. So the most cited factor that would make them difficult to control is labor limitations to get started, including limited time and equipment/crew availability. So mainly, a lot of these cow-calf operations, especially here in the Flint Hills, are owned by pretty much one sole operator, and that's pretty much it. Maybe one hired hand, maybe 2 hired hands, and they just don't have enough time in their day to go out and spend a week trying to combat woody encroachment when you don't have that much time. And again, they can't really hire anyone to it because it's really hard to get people, especially in this labor market. The next most cited response is your cost of control. So basically, I don't have enough money, my margins aren't high enough to justify spending money, buy equipment, buy labor to go out there and chop down my trees. I can't do it feasibly. And then we have another one where the top response is the next one, where you're deciding where to prioritize/control treatment. So basically, they're admitting they may have enough time, money, labor, they'd be able to do a singular parcel out of their, 20 that they have in their operation. But they struggle to figure out, where do they even put it? Where do you put your eggs pretty much on, what pasture do you incentivize going to? You just don't know because you don't have you don't have that experience. And, again, 30% of people stated that, absentee and unengaged landowners are a problem where, they have a neighbor that doesn't really go on the land. They don't graze it. They don't do wildfire. They don't do controlled burns. So that woody encroachment is starting to go onto their land. And then we had some people say, especially in the western part of the state, that they have liability, risk, fear associated with prescribed burning or lack of training and experience. So basically, people in the Flint Hills, I think we know how to prescribe burn pretty well. We do a great job. But when you talk to producers, in Butler County, so, just directly east of Sedgwick and Wichita, they really can't prescribe burn. They don't want to. The city of Wichita is kind of like, we're scared of you to burn. Please don't burn. And when you go into even western Kansas, they have no volunteer firefighter. It's very slim. So they're even scared to light a match because they don't have the training, the expertise, the labor, the equipment to do it. And again, that's a really big, strong, powerful tool to control woody encroachment. Just a little side note, Workshop Survey had a very similar question to this, and results were pretty much the same. However, 46% of them stated that perceptions of tree/brush cover on their land are associated with more beneficial and successful wildlife ecosystems. So take that to what you will. I don't know if many people will agree with that, but that's what they told us. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the data section and figuring out what the true land value impact of what we did. So we used an econometric model known as the hedonic pricing model. I won't show all of the Greek alphanumeric numbers that I had to do in my thesis defense. My big long equation, and I had to give all the theory behind it. I won't bore you. I'll just do it in pretty much layman's terms. So basically, it allows us to get how different characteristics contribute to a market value. So let's look at like Zillow. So Zillow uses models like this to give us estimates of house values using characteristics such as square footage, number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, does it have a garage, how big the lawn is. We're pretty much doing that, but trying to estimate your land value using different land characteristics, such as, your soil type, weather conditions, location, and then in our case, we're looking at how woody cover impacts it. So again, regression results are on your right. You don't need to really understand what the numbers mean. I sometimes don't, but I'll give you a good base understanding of it. So we're looking at, we have our two tree cover coefficients, the one being linear term, another one being squared. Basically, I'll show you what that does in the second slide. But basically, what it's telling us is that there are diminishing returns, and eventually at higher levels of tree cover, there's little to no effect on land value. So again, in the next slide, I'll show you kind of what that curve looks like. But then when we look at all the other coefficients, it, makes sense as you increase how many moderate heat days you have, so how many days where it's not, insanely hot or insanely cold, your land value would go up, kind of proving that maybe it'd be more productive land. And, as your slope percent increases, so how variable your elevation is on your property, that would decrease your land value. And again, we have some coefficients that aren't listed here because it's a coefficient for each year, so we would have 30 more variables here. But basically, it shows us there's a strong trend in rising land prices throughout the time of our study, which I think everyone would agree with, and I think we're on the same page there. Okay, so, there we are, right here. Okay, sorry about that. So this is kind of what that curve looks like with our variables. So on the y-axis, we have price per acre. On the x-axis, we have percent tree cover. So as you see, as tree cover starts to increase, so does our price per acre. You kind of see how it kind of rises, but then it starts to plateau, starts to flatten out around the 30-45%. So at around 35% tree cover, if you start increasing trees, the land value will start to dip. So, and then at around 70% tree cover, you start to get to an idea where your price per acre is lower than that of zero, but that's kind of a kind of a guess number with kind of what we have for observations. So as you look here, when we go all the way to 75, those bounds are our confidence intervals. So basically how confident we are in our results. And as you see, they get huge and we really don't know what's going on. But pretty much the biggest takeaway is what we're showing here, where some tree cover is good on land market value. I won't say it's good for ecological and production reasons, but for a little bit, it does increase your price per acre. And then this is a map, be pretty small for the people in the back again, I apologize, but basically this is the effective woody cover on predicted price per acre. So we have predicted price per acre of all of our transactions that we have with their stated woody cover amounts, and then we re-predict it with woody cover set to 0, and then that difference kind of gives us the idea of what woody cover did to that parcel. So as you see, Flint Hills on the, right side, on the eastern side of the map, pretty dark green. We see some good, strong areas, specifically near Wichita and Butler County, where you'd see a lot stronger of a recreational market due to, a lot more demand, from people from the city, people maybe coming up from I-35, from Texas, Oklahoma. It makes sense that we have a lot stronger of recreational appeal. And then during Medicine Lodge in South Central Kansas, we see a strong increase as well. Let's see. Okay, I think I'm doing good. So discussion and takeaways pretty much. So woody cover is capitalized positively at the current observed levels in the study. Basically, all of our transactions pretty much stated that woody cover had increased your grassland value per acre. However, as we saw kind of in that graph, that woody cover starts to decrease your land value from, if you stopped increasing it, at around 35%, which aligns closely with extension research on rangeland deer habitat in comparable Great Plains regions such as in Oklahoma. So basically, even though white-tailed deer like trees, they don't like a lot of trees. They still, around average, around 30 to 40% tree cover is what wildlife management people would suggest, because they still need forage. They need to eat still. They can't just live in the trees their entire life. And then again, this really pushes and kind of explains the reason why we have NRCS programs is the private incentives, such as your land market value, is insufficient to motivate woody encroachment management by landowners without your outside assistance, such as the government program that we mentioned prior. So that's it. I guess we're doing questions later.
Okay. The danger will increase before it's too late. Stop those cedar trees while you still can. Before it's too late, stop those cedar trees.